Küresel siyasetin ve ekonominin kritik bir dönemden geçtiği şu günlerde detayları Chatham House'un Timothy Ash'le konuşacağız. Welcome to our Antalya Diplomasi Forum and thank you for accepting our interview, Mr. Ash.
Great, thank you very much. Great to be here.
Great, thank you. First of all, at a time as such global fragmentation and conflict, how important the Antalya Diplomasi Forum?
Yeah, it's great. I mean, I don't think there's any event globally that brings together such an interesting group of countries that, often they're done in London or Paris or the US, and they're very Western centred. I think what's nice about this one is it's kind of middle power orientated, or the global south. It gives a different perspective, different view of the world. There are very few Western diplomats actually here, which I think is quite nice, right? I mean, you get a different perspective of what's important for different countries like Turkey, Central Asia, South Caucasus, Africa. But it's been a great turnout, actually. I think 20-odd heads of state, 60 foreign ministers, quite extraordinary. I should say, I first came here like 3 or 4 years ago, and I do remember I was having dinner one evening with a senior Israeli former diplomat. And we're having dinner, and behind the Taliban delegation walked by. I mean, nowhere in the world will you get that. Exactly. And I think you get that here, which is... and I think the world needs more conversations like this. Terrible world we live in. War in Ukraine, Gaza, Lebanon, Iran. Obviously, the past week, there's been peace negotiations around the war in Iran. And, everyone turned up here. So we had the Pakistani delegation. The Saudis were here. I think we saw a meeting of the new, I don't know what you call it, the step countries, the four countries, the Quad.
Or Mediterranean.
The Turkey, the Saudis, the Pakistanis, and the Egyptians, right, met here, which is, an interesting group of countries that bring a lot to the table. Anyway, I think there's been a lot of discussion around the peace process in the Middle East around this conference.
Especially for catching the balance between the other countries.
Yes, look, I mean, obviously the US has a very big voice.
Yes,
one particular person in the US has an extremely loud voice. Europe tends to get its voice heard. We know what the Chinese think generally. But it's good to hear, the views of other countries, and, Turkey is kind of leading in that space.
So, the Strait of Hormuz is now at the center of the crisis, as you know, and disturbing, they are already affecting global energy markets. How serious is the risk for the global economy, and could this trigger a wider economic shock? Are we heading toward a new global financial crisis?
Well, the markets don't seem to think so, right? I mean, if you look at the market performance in the last week or so, it's rallied on the ceasefire. And now I think the S&P is higher than where we were when we started with the Iran war. I find that a little bit strange. I mean, the Straits of Hormuz are still closed. I mean, this weekend we've seen lots of noise. Obviously there was a suggestion that the Straits would be opened, but then the Americans said they'll continue the blockade of the Iranians, and I understand today the Iranians have reimposed a closure of the Straits. Look, we've had 6 weeks now of the Straits being closed, what's different, I think, this time around, I guess if you compare now with the 1970s oil price shock, is in those years the Gulf states were just about oil, right? I mean, but what we've seen in the last 20 years is diversification strategies, right? So the Saudis have Vision 2030, every country has some kind of vision, which is about diversification away from oil and energy. And actually now the Gulf states are important for lots of other things that maybe we don't realise. So obviously they're central to kind of global logistics chains, transportation, air hubs, tourism. And we've also, there are lots of products that, derivatives of oil perhaps that are made in the Middle East, like helium, that are important for global supply chains, that are kind of stuck now. So we're not quite sure. If the Straits don't open soon, then I think we'll begin to see a real impact on the global real economy. I guess Europe is talking about shortages of jet fuel in a couple of weeks. We're already seeing airlines, certainly in Europe and Asia, and I think Europe and Asia is certainly cutting the number of flights. They'll begin to lay people off, lay ground crew, flight staff off, and that will begin to have an impact on global growth, I think. I mean, it depends how long this lasts, right? I mean, let's hope the war ends sooner rather than later.
Turkey is playing balancing role between East and West. Do you think this gives it an economic advantage?
Well, I mean, people often talk about Turkey being in a difficult neighbourhood. It's a classic angle, right? I mean, if you think of the Iraq War, the Second Gulf War, and now we obviously there's concerns about the Iran War, the Third Gulf War maybe, and its impact on oil and commodity prices. And Turkey's a big energy importer, right? But I mean, I guess what I've learned, I've covered Turkey for like 25 years as an economist. I mean, there's amazing resilience there. I mean, always when you think Turkey is going to kind of go into some kind of systemic crisis, it rides through it, it turns it around, it finds other angles that somehow give it durability. And on the particular occasion, we know that every $10 change in the oil price impacts about, between $4 and $5 on the current account. It impacts about 1% on inflation. But actually, Turkey has ridden through this relatively well so far. We saw intervention from the central bank, message of confidence. Reserves have begun to come back a bit now. But still, I guess Turkey could ultimately be winners, perhaps a diversification away from the Gulf states. I mean, there's a lot of focus on tourism in Dubai. Turkey's a great host of tourists. I mean, the numbers are enormous. I mean, maybe it gets even more because of what's going on. So I don't know. There are clear risks. What's going on with Iran and the Gulf War? Let's wait and see how long it lasts. I'm hopeful in terms of durability of the Turkish economy. It's in the centre of so many things now. The middle corridor that everyone is talking around about this conference. Europe will want to diversify its energy supplies even further, right? And trade routes, I guess, and that middle corridor that Turkey is kind of central to, right? I mean, the middle corridor through to Central Asia, South Caucasus, Central Asia, to China, and then there's talk about this alternative one through to Saudi Arabia, up to Turkey. I don't know. There's durability there, and Turks are very good business people generally and good traders, so I'd imagine they'll find some angle that they can take advantage of ultimately.
Thank you very much for your valuable responses, Mr. Ash.
My pleasure. Good to be here. Thank you.